Hey guys, it's Mr. McVay on Tuesday, September 22nd. Obviously, if you're watching this video, you're going to get a shorter video with the next set of punctuation ideas of semicolons, colons, and dashes. I promise it won't be as long as Monday. So, again, if you're seeing this video, again, thank you for following directions. Thank you for checking this out before the virtual time of 1:30 or 2:20. Thank you for just giving this a different look and a different opportunity than watching Khan Academy video or trying to read some notes that may or may not make sense. So when I say this, I say that if this works for you, then great and wonderful. If not, then only other thing I know to do is we try to do everybody live at 1:30 and 2:20, and we all know that's almost impossible. So without further ado, I'm going to go over these notes, but again, you should look at your agenda each day, watch the video, pull up the notes. If you want to do it at the same time, I've gone back and added this idea of opening up a window, pulling up your notes, and then opening up another window and opening up the video, and then that way you can listen as I follow along. If you've got a printer, obviously it might be more convenient to print the notes, have those in front of you, or just open them up in your OneDrive and you can highlight on them. You can do various things with them once you have them pulled up there. So again, I don't want anybody to feel like you have to print, but if you can, it might work better. Those of you who need paper and you're more visual than those who can listen. But anyway, I'm going to turn this around and we're going to talk about semicolons and what they look like and how to use them and various things. So when you're talking about a semicolon, what is a semicolon? It is a punctuation that works similar to a period. In some cases, it's a very tricky part of any writer's process. However, they can be extremely useful. It is a handy piece of punctuation that calls for a pause in reading without coming to a complete stop. Semicolons can be used to break up two independent clauses. So like on Monday, we used a comma and a conjunction to separate two independent clauses. You can use just a semicolon, but the independent clauses have to relate to each other. For example, I love watching Christmas movies. Semicolon, Christmas Vacation is my overall favorite. That would be correct because the two independent clauses relate to each other. So I could use comma and a conjunction, and, so, for, and things like that. But another way to do that is to separate them with a semicolon. This would not be a correct way to do it. I love watching Christmas movies, semicolon, Thor is my favorite Avenger. Again, that would be incorrect because they're not relating to each other. So you have to make sure your two independent clauses relate to each other, and you can be sure to use a semicolon correctly. Semicolons can be used with a conjunctive adverb. If you don't know what your conjunctive adverbs are, they're like however, therefore, nonetheless, things like that. So if you use those, or some of you will try to use them, you have to know where to put the semicolon. So if you're going to use conjunctive adverbs to link together independent clauses, it's especially useful when it's not immediately clear how the independent clauses relate to each other. So again, we go back to this idea of relating. Look at the example. John needs to write his first essay for history class, therefore he went to the library. So a lot of times students will want to stick the semicolon here and a comma here, but if you'll notice the semicolon comes before the conjunctive adverb. So I always want to put my semicolon here, my comma there, and you will be okay. But misplacing the semicolon is what I say a lot of high school students do sometimes. Here are some other examples of conjunctive adverbs, therefore, nonetheless, however, furthermore, and moreover. So I almost had all five, but there are a few that can help you understand that as well. Semicolons can be used when separating lists that are already full of commas in order to make the list clear. So you go back to Monday, if you've got a bunch of items in a series that have commas separating the items in a series, like city-state. That's a good example. For example, I've lived in Jacksonville, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, Alexander City, Alabama, Gunnersville, Alabama, and now Troy, Alabama. So all my items in a series are city-states. And so to separate the city-state combination, you can use semicolons. Look at this example. My favorite professors are Dr. Sheff, who teaches history, Professor Mustard, who teaches geology, and Dr. Slew, who teaches math. It's confusing because we get a bunch of names and a bunch of commas. So to separate the items in a series, I have Dr. Sheff, and this is my clause that modifies Dr. Sheff. So I would like to put a semicolon here. Professor Mustard, who teaches geology. So again, we've got the clause who teaches geology modifying Mustard. So I would put a semicolon there. But if you'll notice my items in a series, I've got these commas separating the adjective clause modifying that. So again, if I have something as simple as cities and states as my items in a series, then I can separate the city-state combination with a semicolon. Okay? Our next rule, or our next punctuation we're going to look at is colons. Colons are used to introduce lists, explanation, examples, or quotations. I think up until this point, you all have been taught about how it introduces lists. I want to go to the store and buy the following. And I use a colon and I say chips, soda, cheese, hamburger meat, and some buns. So that would be my list. Example. Colons can be used, but not when following a verb. And so there are exceptions to that list. So if I said Janice needs to pack 3 things for the trip, here is her list: sunglasses, pizza, and sunscreen. Or Janice needs to pack the following 3 things for her trip. Sometimes you'll see the word following or follows in there, and so that just gives you a way when to use a colon. However, you cannot use a colon after a verb. The 3 things that Janice needs to pack for the trip are, now are is a verb. You cannot use them after a prepositional phrase either. So sometimes on test, like the ACAP or something like that, they'll try to sneak that colon in after a verb or a preposition. The things that Janice needs to pack for the trip are. And so you don't want to use that in that case. So again, make sure you put your colon after as follows, the following, or a noun. Colons can be used to connect two related independent clauses. Okay? Can be. It's almost like you're restating something to help clarify what the first one says. So don't get this confused with semicolons. Don't get this confused with comma and conjunction. All right, so 2 related independent clauses. Megan had to buy sherbet. It was essential to the punch. It would also be okay to put the semicolon here. So just letting you know that you can sometimes use a colon to separate 2 independent clauses. Sometimes this independent clause clarifies. It's related and it clarifies the first statement. So again, looking at that colon and the semicolon, try not to get that confused. We're looking for the second one to, like I said, clarify why Megan had to buy the punch. If I go back and look at that example in semicolons, Christmas movies are favorite, Christmas Vacation. It doesn't necessarily clarify, but they are related to one another. Colons can be used to introduce a direct quote. Now, we talked about this with commas, but you can also use it to introduce a direct quote. Normally, this is used for historical people or literary people. Peter shouted to his friends, "Only buy pizza if you're going to share it." I generally like to tell students if you're quoting someone from history, you're quoting someone from literature, or you're quoting someone from the the Bible, then that is where you want to quote, use the colon for the quote. Normally, any other time, you would just use a comma. Okay? Obviously, colons are used for time. So if the time is 1:38, your colon would go there as well. So where do you use colons in that kind of case? That would be the colon there. Okay? Last but not least are dashes. Dashes, not to be confused with hyphens, can be used to break up parts of a sentence and add emphasis. So you can add emphasis to part of a paragraph or a sentence. I always caution students, don't get dash happy in your essay or in your paragraph. Use it sparingly. So dashes can be used to add emphasis or break up parts of a sentence, but don't get it confused with hyphen. If I have 22 students, this is a hyphen. All right? A dash is going to be a little bit bolder. So it's not underscore, it's not underline, it's a dash. So it's hard to make a dash when you type on Word, but we'll talk about how to do that later. All right, so the example. Dashes can be used to add emphasis to the end of a sentence. Bear with me. There was one woman who stood out from her peers, Mary Jane. And I like to tell students that sometimes a dash will work like a colon. It can work like a comma. And so on the ACT, particularly the ACT, you need to know that. You need to know that it would be perfectly fine to use a dash here. It would be fine to use a comma here. It would also be fine to use a colon here. But what you cannot use there is a semicolon. Okay? There was one woman who stood out from her peers, and I'm going to emphasize, clarify, relate Mary Jane to the word, the woman. Okay? This creates a dramatic pause before the name. I always tell students when we do poetry, anytime you see that dash, you need to pause before the name. You notice right here, it says this is discouraged in academic writing. A colon is used instead. So for you academia giants, when you're doing a paper for a college class, you might want to stick with a colon. But it's okay if you're writing with a pen and you're writing a draft or you're trying to emphasize an idea. Look at the example here. This is what would be expected in a college paper. But again, I don't see either one of these used, so I get excited when students try to use a colon or a dash. So try to practice that. Try to work that into your style and your craft. Dashes can be used to set off the beginning of a sentence. Here's an example. Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman. These are the classic icons of horror stories. And again, we're trying to determine what we're emphasizing here. These are names. They're used for emphasis. They're not the subject. They're not part of the independent clause. Here's my subject. Here's my verb. Okay, so let's not get confused. This is words to add emphasis. If anything, they're positives, modifying or not modifying, but adding information to the word icon. So again, you can use a dash to set off things at the beginning of a sentence. Dashes can be used to set off extra content that adds to but is not necessary to a sentence. And so we've talked about non-essential, not important. This is not important, not necessary to a sentence. The many varieties of pie make it my favorite dessert. All right, so I'm going to add some emphasis here. It's not necessary to the sentence. The many varieties of pie, blueberry, pumpkin, and apple make it my favorite dessert. The above sentence would be complete without the information within the dashes. However, the information within the dashes adds something useful to the sentence. Again, we'd be perfectly fine doing this right here with commas. We'd be okay. So the purpose of the dash is it's really not academic. It's more of a style for students to use to add emphasis to and just maybe change how you're doing things, and to just to be aware that as you get older, And as you go to more high school classes and as you get through high school and going to college, it's just a different style that lets the reader, in this case, a college teacher or a high school teacher, know that you have better control over your language. You know what you're saying. You know when to pause. And so the purpose of yesterday and today is to really show you all the importance of needing to pause in certain situations. So whether that's items in a series with commas, introductory elements like a phrase or a clause, those things are we're going to learn about. So as we learn about those things, you need to know where the comma goes. And today obviously is more about style. So the semicolon and colon and dash can be avoided altogether. Don't get me wrong. You don't ever have to use them, but you will be tested on them on the ACT. So learning that and knowing that the comma, the colon, and the dash kind of work the same way will always help you get a few extra questions right on the ACT. So with that being said, when you finish watching this, complete today's activity and you will be finished for me for the day. So if you do this in the morning or before the 1:30 to 2:20 times and you don't have any questions, have a great day. But obviously if you have questions, do not hesitate to go to conferences to say, hey, I don't quite understand this. Can I have some more? And we'll do something different. Hope it works. Have a great day.